Okay, hopefully this is recording now. The first one I did wasn't recording. Okay, so thank you for watching this. Please pay careful attention. I do have specific things, as I mentioned in class, that you will have to do in the reply, and I will know if you watch this or not. Okay, so this is talking about interpersonal relationships. Keep in mind that this could be romantic, it could be family interpersonal relationships, it could be your friends, your best friends. So don't look at this as everything is about romantic, because usually we have like one, well, hopefully only one romantic relationship, but we have so many interpersonal relationships in our lives, and they all affect us and impact us in some way. So I'm looking at the PowerPoint as I speak into the camera here. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm reading my PowerPoints as I go. So, interpersonal relationships defined. Think about interpersonal relationships. Obviously, a relationship is some kind of connection, and as I said, there could be many different kinds. Even within groups, you have relationships, but specifically interpersonal relationships, there are shared perceptions, and I'm sure you have found that sometimes they were one-sided. Maybe you didn't think the friendship was as strong as the other person, and vice versa. So they can be one-sided more, depending on the circumstance, especially I think for, extroverts who have so many friends, and then introverts who are friendly with people but maybe only have a few actual good friends. I myself, I only have maybe two or three real friends that I feel very connected to, and everyone thinks we've got a good friendship, but I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay. So sometimes they can be one-sided more. There's an ongoing interdependent connection there because you rely on each other and you impact each other. These are the people who maybe you live with, or maybe you work with, or you have a definite, true relationship that when one of them does something, it impacts the other in a good or a bad way. It can go both ways. There are relational expectations. However, they don't always match. Sometimes people, I think we talked about with the verbal, the idea that everyone has their own idea of what makes a relationship. Um, so maybe you each have a different expectations out of the relationship. Um, and again, this could be good or bad, and they could be violated, especially if you're thinking that, a true interpersonal relationship or friendship means not talking about what you've told them, and then they're out there talking about your business. That's violating your relationship. So these are things that do happen. Interpersonal intimacy, there's a chart on page 244. But the idea of intimacy is not always a fit. People always want to think about intimacy as physical, and it's not. Intimacy has to do with the sharing of selves, the closeness that you feel with each other, the idea that you have a deep respect, and they talk about mutually confirming the relationship where you each realize the value that you have for each other, and each accept each other's sense of self. We talk about tolerance. Well, it's not so much tolerance, it's more that you just accept that this is how they are. There's not really so much a tolerance as, this is who they are, and maybe you like them for it, or you respect them more for it. But there's no need to hide who you are or changing who you are, because you just accept each other, and this is how they are. Self-disclosure is a big factor here, because if you're not sharing information about yourself, then that's going to lead them to maybe not trust you as much. So definitely with intimacy, self-disclosure is a truly big part of it, because you're willing to discuss things that are close to you, and there's the idea of reciprocity, where you each give each other information that maybe you don't give others in a truly high intimate relationship. Maybe in lower relationships, that intimacy is not there because you don't have quite that strong friendship. Circumstance or choice, we have the idea of when we work, go to school. So those are circumstances where you're put together a lot. So maybe you form a friendship, and especially if you tend to be friends outside of work, or outside of school, that could be more of a choice. But choice, you've somehow met someone maybe out the story. You hear of odd ways people meet, and it's kind of cool, some of the stories you get. You hear, of course, all the romantic stories, the movies where they met on a train or something. Um, so choice is when we choose to become friends with that person, to get to know them. Maybe we saw them out someplace, or maybe they are in our workplace or school, but we're not thrown together much, but we choose to go out of our way to meet them and talk to them. Power in relationships, we talked about this with the Parks relational theory with those arrows going up and down. Complementary, you have one's dominating, the other submitting. Competitive and submissive, symmetrical, and I talked about how if both arrows are going up, you're competing, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And then if you're both submissive, that could also be kind of a bad thing because no one's willing to take choices. Maybe you're avoiding issues. And I think that could be a problem in relationships. Parallel is where the power alternates between both, and I think that's really an ideal. No one should ever have true power in a relationship. It should always be some kind of equality there, but maybe you take turns because maybe one person has more knowledge or skill in one area than the other, and so you kind of take turns. That ideally should how it should always be. The next slide, we have the genesis of interpersonal relationships, and we're talking about attraction. I mean, because ideally, how does any relationship start? There has to be something that attracted you to that person for you to start talking to them. Family, of course, we're thrown together. You have no choice. But interpersonal attraction, the degree to which we wish to form and maintain. And you have the short-term initial attraction versus the long-term initial attraction. And we think about maybe there's something about someone that you thought was cool or attractive or caught your attention in some way, but it doesn't stay. Maybe they do something after that makes you think, okay. With long-term initial attraction, this is something where you're interested and it lasts and you want to continue because maybe you have more opportunity as well. Sometimes we don't have opportunities. Communication attraction determines whether we continue the relationship or not. Once we start communicating, talking, maybe some of that attraction goes down. I think for me, once I hear someone talking negatively, that for me is a turnoff because I'm such a positive person that it's hard for me to have negative people in my life. So for me, that would kind of maybe kill it, unless for me, I might stay more to help them and to see if maybe they just need someone to talk to. But once we communicate and start talking, that attraction is either going to continue or not, and then we'll see how the relationship goes. Some sources of initial attraction. And this is where you definitely need to take notes here because this is going to be one of your first tasks to do in your reply. We have these sources. We have that proximity. Ideally, if someone is close to us, it's a lot easier. Long distance, it's a little harder to do. But the idea of physical appearance, and it doesn't have to be someone being handsome or beautiful. It could be someone has a sincere smile that just grabs you and gets your attention, or something about their eyes. I like hands. I noticed hands for some reason. But we all have something that gets us looking again. And even someone who we initially thought wasn't all that great looking, as we get to know them more, they start to become more attractive to us because we start to see the inner side of them. But this is where I want you to think about a time that you can remember with one of these attractions. They have the social attraction where it's simply, this looks like someone, this sounds like someone would be fun to hang out with. I want to have them join my group. Task attraction would be, oh, this person is really good at woodworking. I have to build a shop for my dog or a dog house or something. Or the romantic where you're just looking for that right Mr. or Miss to spend your life with, or that you think you would like. So you want to get to know them as maybe something to be long-term, like for a life partner. So these are well, 4 areas really, because that physical appearance though is kind of what gets you when you first see them. But you have 3 areas that why you might want to continue: social, task, or romantic. So think about a friendship or a romantic relationship where one of those 3 areas someone caught your attention, and just a quick, you don't have to go into detail, just kind of like, what was it about them and which of those areas did that fill? Okay, so that's your task number one to do. And then we also have sources of both initial and long-term attraction. The idea of competence, someone who looks like they're just good at doing something. And it could be knowledge, it could be skills with their hands. My daddy's a mechanic and a carpenter, so something that really gets my attention are people who are very competent and able to work with their hands. To me, that's something I value, although I do also value knowledge to go with that too, since I am a scholar and a nerd and I like learning. I do enjoy people who could also have good conversations. So for me, competence and maybe kind of knowledge or thinking, but also physical, like hand skills, able to do things. Self-disclosure, maybe the idea of someone who just has a good the idea of good conversation, you feel comfortable talking and sharing information, that could be a definite a good connection. Reciprocation of liking and the idea that you both like each other, because obviously if you don't both like each other, then the friendship or relationship can't continue. Similarities. I think we talk about birds of a feather flock together, and definitely having similarities, knowing that, oh, this will be someone will be fun to do things that I like with, is a definite strong attraction. But then you also have the idea of differences and complementary needs, and sometimes having someone who's different from you. I'm very much an introvert. Having someone who's a little bit more outgoing for me can be good because it pulls me out and gets me doing things. And then that introvert can be good to maybe help a person calm down and see the value of just spending quiet time together. So there is also the value of opposites attract as well. So these are some sources of what might be attractive. The next slide, we get to stages of interpersonal relationship development, and we have various types of relationships. Obviously the stranger, because everyone at some point is a stranger to us, and then acquaintances. These are people we know, but as far as to call them a friend, no, it's just you know their name maybe, and maybe you don't even know both names, maybe you just know one name. But and then of course a friend, someone you actually, they know things about you, you know things about them, you actually maybe know where they live and such. And then your close friend, who is going to know a lot more about you. You may even know their middle name, and definitely where they live, your phone numbers and such, and you probably talk quite more often. And then, of course, your best friend, your lover, your spouse. These are the people who really know, like, all about us, and they are the ones who could blackmail us. All right, so those are the different types of relationships. Now, how relationships kind of escalate. We have that pre-interaction awareness, passive strategies to learn about someone, because they're an acquaintance right now, you don't really, or a stranger. You have introductions, casual banter, you explore, ask questions, learn about each other, you intensify. Now you're starting to get into deeper self-disclosure. You're actually sharing secrets, maybe things that a lot of people don't know about you. There's a dependence. You rely on each other, you spend time together, you may even have an affectionate language and terms. And I love it how, you know, men, their best way to show affection is they insult each other. It's really cute. And then intimacy. And this could be, again, it doesn't have to be that physical. It could simply be that truly like best friend where you accept each other, you understand each other, you discuss the relationship, you maybe have synchronized type as far as doing things at certain times together, and there may be physical contact, even again, not as a lover or spouse, but as a best friend, you're allowed to actually touch each other more than maybe other people are allowed to. So it depends on the nature of that relationship. Okay, next slide. Stages of interpersonal relationship development. We have the relational de-escalation, and this is normal. Some relationships, they go down a couple of levels or they go back up. Have that post-intimacy relationship where you go from romantic to friendship. And again, these are normal with even romantic relationships. You may kind of move back down a little bit, go through trouble, and then build back up. But you have turmoil or stagnation. turmoil of stagnation. This is where, and that should be or stagnation, I'm sorry. Turmoil, and that's where you have conflict, you have problems, you have issues. It could be coercive. This is where we could even get to the point of having physical abuse or verbal abuse. It doesn't have to be physical to be hurting, but there's definite turmoil. This is a problem in the relationship. And even friendships. I mean, we may find this with friendships, those friends who try to control us. Stagnation would be the idea of losing vitality. Maybe you're getting where you're so predictable with each other that the relationship isn't moving forward anymore. Maybe you're bored with it, but that doesn't feel that vitality of that relationship is gone. So these can be problems too. The de-intensification. Now you're not spending as much time together. You're not interacting as much. There's more distance between you, and it could be physical and or the idea of maybe you used to talk on the phone a lot, and now you're not talking much. And there's definitely a decrease in dependence. You're not relying on each other as much. You've stopped counting on each other. There's an individualization where you go from we to us and us to I and me. Separation, you're actually intentionally taking out those interactions, maybe not sharing lunches like you used to, not being there for each other. You're dividing up your stuff now where it used to be, maybe you had stuff you kept at each other's place or car or something, and now you're kind of keeping all those separate. Then post-separation effects, and this is the grave dressing, the excuses we give for ending the relationship. And this is, especially like my first marriage, I tried to say, well, we were so young and we were just grew apart, and, we didn't get counseling because I didn't want my kids to realize how abusive their daddy was to me. So we might give different excuses. People may or may not understand, oh, you guys are so great together, but, sometimes people change, or maybe it shouldn't have been friends or romantic relationship to begin with, and that does happen. And that's where you just need to learn from them. Don't sit there and be bitter about it. Some principles underlying the relationship stages. There's a chart on page 254. It shows possible examples of how the stages work, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into detail. You can look at that yourself, and this is where you should be giving me, as the second bullet, add in something about how one of those stages, so I'm putting that in here, add stage from 254. So I want you to give me an example of one of those stages, and maybe a personal experience quickly, or just make up an example of how that might work. Okay, so that's bullet number 2. You can choose to remain in a specific relational stage. Sometimes maybe you just don't want that relationship to go further. Maybe you prefer keeping at a certain level, especially with a friendship. Or maybe, they want it to be a romantic relationship. You don't. The speed we go through each stage, everyone's different. So some people may zip through all the stages. Some may stay in certain stages a little bit longer. Changes in relationships are signaled. We can, if we really analyze it, we can probably think about where a relationship changed. Maybe not always. Sometimes it takes a lot of reflection to go back and see it. And then changes occurs within each stage. And again, sometimes we may or may not, or we may realize like, wow, I'm realizing how much this person means to me. And then they also occurs between stages. Movement through the stages can be forward, backward, on again, off again. So again, every relationship is different. Some people may totally skip a couple and just go straight to being close because they just connect right away. Others maybe move slowly. And then relational development involves negotiating change. Either it's mutual, and it should, ideally it's mutual, sometimes it's not, but you decide either we're going to stay here or we're going to end the relationship. So those are all different kinds of stages that we might go through. Social exchange theory. I love this theory because this really, for people who wonder why people stay in an abusive relationship, this kind of explains it to a point. So relationship decisions are based on the greatest amount of reward for the lowest cost. And if you think about the stock exchange, you buy low and you sell high. Well, same thing here in a relationship. You stay when the costs are low, you get out when the costs are high. But there are a lot of other things going on in there. So immediate and forecasted rewards and costs. Present time, at this point, you're getting something out of a relationship, and whatever bad stuff is going on, you know it's going to be short term. Maybe they're in the process of changing jobs, or they're doing something. College is definitely, college can be tough, but it's only going to be short term. Cumulative rewards and costs. Maybe you've been with them so long, or your friendship or a romantic relationship, that you feel like you owe it to a relationship to stay in. It's so much invested that and it takes time to divest. It takes time to kind of get out of the relationship, and that's really hard when you've been friends or involved for a long time. I think you can probably think of examples where you were kind of reluctant to end a friendship or something because of the history you had. Expected rewards and costs. We have ideals for a relationship. Now sometimes those ideals don't always come through, which is why we have those costs, because maybe the relationship isn't quite what you thought it would be. And I think sometimes the movies give us bad ideals about what we don't all ride off into the sunset. And then comparison to alternatives. Maybe you're not in an ideal relationship, but there's no other alternative. And for some people, it's hard being alone. I've learned it's better than being with the wrong person. So you stay though. Now, the problem is if an alternative option appears, now you may decide to leave, especially if the costs are really starting to build up. So here's your third task. I want you to add a third bullet about how is the social exchange theory like the stock market. Okay, and we've got 2 more slides getting there. So then theories, the next slide, theories, we look at the relational dialectics theory. And this is kind of a cool theory because if you really think about it, you can probably see this in a lot of your friendships and relationships you've been in, and even within your family. And so it's the idea of managing the tensions that pull us 2 ways. And remember, I think I talked about introverts, and you have introverts, you have extroverts, and yet everyone kind of falls on that continuum. So the same thing with these dialectical tensions. You have the people who want to be connected all the time versus the people who need autonomy. And that's where you might get the extroverts are a little bit more with liking to be connected, spend time together a lot. An introvert, we need our time. We get burnt out. Even with someone we love dearly, we need time alone. So here, how much time do we spend together? How much time do we spend apart? And for those who are totally opposite ends there as far as what they need, this can be a real problem, and that can be tough. Predictability versus novelty, and this is where you might get into the people who cheat a little bit, because you have the ones who like the excitement, the novelty of something new, the uncertainty is kind of exciting, versus the people who need that predictability, the certainty, the stability. They want to know exactly what they're doing every point of the day. And again, so this is where the ones who like the novelty, they might get bored with relationships, so they might be more tempted to kind of go outside of the relationship. And those who like that stability are usually left flabbergasted because they thought everything was great and they love that stability. So there are ways that you definitely want to be able to meet this. And this is where dating, even when you're married for a long time, dating is still important. Kind of treating the relationship like something special. My daughter with her kids, they still make time at least twice a month that they try and get out and date and do things together as a couple, because it's really important. And then the openness versus closedness. And this is the idea that people who post everything on Facebook, they tell everybody everything that's going on because they just love sharing what they're doing. And then you have the people who are closed, very private. It's not that they're hiding things, they just tend to not talk about much about their life to anybody. And when you have people, these opposites, this can be a real problem too. Like, why are you always telling everybody our business? And they're like, well, why does everything have to be a secret? And there can be a real problem here at first, because if you don't really know the person, maybe you think they're hiding something. So that can cause a problem too. So these are those 3 tension areas that can cause a lot of problems in relationships, and it's learning to get that balance. And everyone has different needs. So using dialect to explain relational movement, because we all have different needs, and finding that need if someone relationship-wise can be helpful, but it can cause problems. Social media now, because of what people share on social media, this can cause other problems as well. And then coping with these tensions, we have denial, disorientation. Maybe you don't want to admit there's a problem. You don't want to face it. The cyclic alternation or segmentation, where maybe you kind of partition things off and deal with different parts of these different needs. Moderation is just thinking about a way to maybe get a balance. Recalibration of the relationship, maybe looking at what is really most important, and you might have to choose one of these areas that maybe you just agree that this is going to be a problem and focus on the other two. And then reframing, finding a way to talk about these issues in different ways so that it's not quite so much a problem. Okay. And for your fourth bullet, I want you to give an example of a relational dialectical tension that you've had, a friend, romantic relationship. Which of those three areas was a problem, and were you able to solve it? So that's bullet point number 4. And last slide, theories we get into: self-disclosure and social penetration theory. So intimacy, as I said, is not always physical. It has to do with the sharing of yourself with someone else. And there's an increased depth and breadth of self-disclosure on page 259. It kind of gives a good chart diagram to illustrate how it works. But if you think of an onion or a pie, I think Shrek calls himself an onion. You have to peel the layers to get deeper into that onion. Just like with a piece of pie, when you cut pieces and you go more around the pie. Okay, so breadth is the idea of the number of topics around. And when we first meet someone, we maybe kind of focus on a lot of little things, but we don't go very deep into detail. As we start to get to know each other more, and the uncertainty, and we start to trust each other more, now we're going to go deeper into that pie and take bigger slices out and maybe start going more around the pie. And there might be a few areas that maybe we focus on more because they're more intimate, more important to us. But it takes time getting to know someone to go deeper and more around. Enhancing intimacy by self-disclosing over time. Again, those shallow levels that we're exploring, we're kind of feeling each other out, because especially the hot topics nowadays, which even the weather is a hot topic now. Weather, religion, political is definitely an issue. So we have some areas that are definitely touchy. We may not touch on until we get a little bit more trust in each other. And the thing is that relationships cannot become intimate without self-disclosure. So a relationship cannot build and become more if you don't talk about yourself to them. Characteristics of self-disclosure: they're moderated by rules, boundaries. You have the implicit, explicit, no rules. So some implicit rules, we know that it's something that you know about the person, you know that you don't break that rule, you know you don't tell strangers something. Explicit: please don't tell so-and-so I told you this. Or there may be no rules. Maybe you not telling anything that you need rules, but you kind of have those boundaries. My best friend Paul, when he started dating Kathy, she of course knew I was his best friend, so she would kind of, talk to me a little bit, trying to find out, Paul's intentions. And I think she even asked me one time about chances of marriage. And of course, that wasn't my place to say. So, because I knew that boundary, I don't cross that. And he never told me that. I just knew it was an implicit boundary there. So all I could say to her was, well, I know he's seriously looking for someone. Why don't you just hang there, give it a chance? I know he's not playing you. Just give it some time, see how it goes. And of course, I already knew he was going to marry her, so I was excited. But yeah, we have those boundaries, the rules that we have. Self-disclosure occurs in small increments, although there are times when you connect with someone, maybe you speed through them. It moves from less personal to more personal. You talk about cliches, things you may talk about simply: facts, bio. These are simple things. Attitudes and ideas now are getting more. Feelings. And then you get to the peak and gut level, where you just kind of, how you really feel deep down. It's reciprocal, because really, if it's not reciprocal, then there's not really self-disclosure going. There's a dyadic effect. And ideally, if you share something really personal, ideally the other person should share something just as personal. It shouldn't be you're sharing about a loss and then they're talking about the weather. That definitely would not be working too well. Involves risk and requires trust, because when you think about it, when we share ourselves, we're giving people ammunition to use against us. Page 263 has motives. And warranting is looking for clues of validity online, because I remember one of the first clues I got that my little cheater guy was messing around is that he went from being engaged to suddenly his relationship wasn't showing. I'm like, that was kind of funny. And it reflects perceptions of our relationships. What we think about our relationship can kind of be shown in how we self-disclose. If we don't share much of ourselves, like my first husband, I mean, it was so abusive. I got where I didn't share anything personal about myself. I didn't tell him like my deep inner thinkings, because I knew he would use it against me. So I didn't trust him, and that kind of showed. And of course, eventually I left him because I couldn't take it. So social penetration theory is a good one as far as something we do naturally, we don't think about, but if you really break it down and think about it, that it would make sense. So let's see, 1, 2, 3. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this should be your 5th bullet point now. How does the social penetration theory compare to an onion or a pie? So that will be the last thing that you will talk about. Please make sure that you do this in the way that I said earlier in the video. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I will be checking things throughout the week. I will have my computer with me. I do have a hotel room that will have internet, so I will be looking and checking up on things as you go. So please make sure you watch this, hopefully Wednesday, what would be class time, or at least by Friday evening. Please watch and comment, and this will count for your attendance. And I'll also give a separate grade for if you do everything you're supposed to do, because I'll be looking for those things. Thank you so much. I'll see you next Monday.